Welcome, everybody, to the latest in EJIS Conversations. I'm Jason Ralph, one of the co-editors of the journal, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Jeffrey Ding. Jeffrey is Assistant Professor at the George Washington University, and he is a co-author with Allan Dafoe of an excellent article that we recently published in the European Journal of International Security called Engines of Power, Electricity and AI and General Purpose Military Transformations. And it is currently our most downloaded article in the European Journal of International Security. So we thought, with that in mind, we'd get Jeffrey to tell us about the article and why it's so significant and attracting a lot of attention, which is great. So welcome, Jeffrey. Maybe we can start by you telling us what motivated you and your co-author to write this article.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on, Jason. Really glad to take this opportunity to talk a little bit more about the behind the scenes of how this article came to be. I think for both Allan and I, we were struck by how often we would run into the phrase AI is the new electricity. It had become just this mantra that machine learning experts, social scientists, policymakers would throw around when they were trying to grapple with how artificial intelligence is going to impact politics in the future. And we were particularly struck by how even military innovation scholars, people in the national defense field would throw around this analogy of AI as the new electricity. But it's almost like nobody was really taking it seriously. The focus was still very much on AI's impact as an autonomous weapon system. And very few people had actually gone back and studied how electricity shaped military affairs. So that was the starting point for us, was to understand how AI will affect the future of warfare. Can we learn from this comparison of AI to electricity? And both of them are considered by economists as general purpose technologies. And so that was the initial insight, was to go back and look at this economist literature, research by economic historians as well, on general purpose technologies, GPTs, of which electricity is a prototypical example, and try to derive some lessons for how electricity and GPTs would normally affect military effectiveness, see if that played out in the electricity case, and try to derive some lessons in the AI case.
Okay, and so what were your findings, and what's the main argument of the article?
Yeah, so the main lessons learned from the GPT literature is that the impact pathway from the initial emergence of a new GPT to how it ultimately affects economic productivity is very broad. You have to change, it has to affect and diffuse throughout a wide range of sectors of the economy. It's very delayed. It takes a very, very long time. I actually have a print of a patent for an electric dynamo by Nikola Tesla behind me. That the electric dynamo gets invented in 1880s, 1870s. Electricity's impact on manufacturing and economic productivity does not occur until 1920s. So oftentimes it's a very delayed impact pathway. And so we were taking some of these lessons learned from GPTs and economic productivity and trying to translate that to military effectiveness, how GPTs would affect military capabilities. And we predicted that it would be similar. electricity and AI would not have an impact through a very narrow pathway. It's not just about the weapon systems or a single military innovation, but they would have to affect a broad range of military innovations. And the effect would be very much delayed and prolonged between the initial emergence of a new technology and its ultimate impact. In the military, specifically, an additional point was that general purpose technologies, their impact has to come through, has this like spillover effect into industrial productivity, and how GPTs have this potential to reshape a country's sort of like war production potential in terms of its industrial base. And so all of those things we did find to be borne out by the evidence in the history of military electrification. And sort of, we think that that should guide how scholars and policymakers think about AI's effect on the military.
Yeah, thanks. Thinking further about those implications for international security and international security policy, one sentence jumped out at me. Maybe I can just read this. It's from page 3 of the article. So some scholars, you write, also suggest that AI will significantly transform military effectiveness in a relatively short time frame, and that AI will enable rising powers to leapfrog the US in military strength. But you argue, so you say as a conclusion, will show your GMT-based approach points towards different conclusions on all these fronts, and that's from your article. So, yeah, in terms of these broader questions of international security and rising powers and the challenge of US power, maybe you can elaborate on that and say how this article speaks to that.
Yeah, this was one of the key claims we were trying to defend, because previous scholarship and thinking on how AI will affect the military balance of power had emphasized, because the technology is so dual use and technologies might spread faster in the commercial realm, AI could narrow gaps between the leading militaries and the rising militaries. And we disagreed with that, in part because it's not just, we can't just look at the spread of technologies in the commercial realm. There's all these other factors that affect whether militaries can adopt GPTs effectively. And one of the factors that we identify is the military has to be able to tap into and connect to a robust industrial base in that general purpose technology. And so if the leading military actually has very strong connections with the civilian industry in the GPT and is able to tap into that industrial base, and actually GPTs can retrench existing military balances. And we found that with our historical case study, where in the lead up to World War I, Russia was this rising military that everyone thought was going to challenge the existing military balance of power. And Russia was able to build up some competencies in a narrow area of military applications of electricity, including electric mines. And they built up this narrow pool of expertise. But the Russian military wasn't able to tap into this broader civilian base, this broader industrial base in electricity. Russia's overall electrification rates were much lower, and the Russian military was relatively disconnected from the civilian sphere. So they weren't able to adapt to this broader trend of military electrification. In contrast, Britain was able to adapt to that because they were able to tap into this broader industrial base in electricity. And so I think the parallel to today is actually currently Russia's military, even China's military, they're relatively disconnected from the civilian industrial base. And the US's military, as one of the leading militaries, the US does have those connections to the industrial base in AI technologies specifically. There's no, one example I like to give is there's no Russian equivalent or Chinese equivalent of Palantir, which is a big data analytics company that was largely incubated by the US national security community. A CIA venture fund called InQtel was at the heart of building a Palantir. And now Palantir is servicing multiple branches of the US national defense community. So that was kind of our takeaway in terms of the broader international security implications.
Yeah, great. Thank you. It's a great example of how historical research can inform contemporary questions. I mean, it's a great article for that. What about future research, either in this area or in your own research agenda?
Yeah, so Allan and I have worked on some other projects in the past. Now he's actually at DeepMind, one of the leading AI labs in the world. So he's more focused on shaping what these leading AI labs are doing. I'm hoping to continue this historical approach to looking at how AI will affect issues of international security. One current project I'm really excited about is looking at how AI will shape military accidents in the future. So there's a lot of risks associated with some of these cutting edge AI models. A lot of times we don't really even know how they're getting the outputs that they're getting. So something like OpenAI's ChatGPT that's taken the internet by storm. One really interesting thing is the researchers behind the model themselves, they couldn't understand why the model, which was trained almost entirely on English language texts, was getting so good at responding to Chinese language prompts. Like somehow the model had learned this like machine language embedded, this like universal interlingual representation. So there's just all these things about these new cutting edge AI models that are so surprising that we really can't explain. It's hard to interpret. And so I think there's a risk with applying these in safety critical settings, including like military systems that have targeting and firing capabilities. So I'm going back through historical cases where software development has contributed to military accidents, like the Vincennes incident in 1988, where a US EJIS system shot down an Iranian civil airliner, killing, I think, 290 people. And trying to figure out what was the effect of the software development process on that accident, and looking specifically at the relationship between the US military end users and the software developers, and trying to figure out what went down, what broke down in that process, in part because the US military has to rely on these external civilian contractors to build the software. So the thinking there is that AI is just a type of software. So some of those lessons from past incidents where software contributed to military accidents could potentially also translate to how we deal with AI affected accidents in the military.
Great. Well, that sounds fascinating and really important research. And let me end just by thanking you for submitting your article to our journal. And I hope it gets even more downloads than it's getting, because it is, like I say, fascinating and really important. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thanks for publishing the work.
Thank you.